So I think we can start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this panel. I'm Gérald Sauvageon, SVP Sales for Video and Advanced TV at Smart. Today, we will open an interesting discussion on CTV, OTT, inventory and monetization, quality control for advertising. And to start, let me introduce our two panelists, Mike Moran from WhiteOps and Jean-Christophe from Smart. Mike, can you please explain your role and responsibility at WhiteOps?
Of course. I'm Mike Moran. I'm a senior data scientist at WhiteOps on the detection team, as well as the technical lead of our connected TV anti-fraud solutions. For those that don't know, WhiteOps is the global leader in bot mitigation and fraud detection, where we verify the humanity of over 10 trillion interactions per week, with a large or a decent part of that being in the connected TV and OTT space.
Thank you, Mike. Jean-Christophe?
Yep. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jean-Christophe Peube. I'm caring about two departments at Smart, marketplace quality and analytics. In analytics, we strive in making Smart a data-driven company to fasten its growth and optimize its operations. While in marketplace quality, we are managing the subtle balance between business risk and sheer growth on both the supply and demand sides of our marketplace.
Thank you. So just before starting the discussion, we thought it was important to give some definition first, as the terms of connected TV and OTT are often interchangeably in the industry. When we talk about OTT, we consider any app or website that provides streaming video content over the internet and bypass traditional distribution like IPTV or cable. When we talk about connected TV, we consider a TV set connected to the internet or devices such as games console or set-top box like Apple TV and Roku. So just to set up the context, we can say that CTV OTT are in a unique position. It's literally the connection between television and digital. It's also the right way to reach people everywhere and leverage ad-supported content. So advertisers are, of course, specifically excited by CTV because viewers are increasing their presence there. They can reach specific audience. CTV offers also ad buyers flexibility, audience segmentation, targeting thanks to data, programmatic planning and buying. But we agree all that this channel is on without its growing pains and barriers. First, the access to the inventory, it's highly fragmented. It means that the inventory is spread out in a way that makes hard for any single channels or provider to deliver the kind of scale that advertisers are used to get with linear TV. The second challenge is measurement. Changing how consumers view content today have made audience and advertising measurement more difficult. There is a lack of standard measurement, and it's leading to challenge to cross-screen video advertising for rich frequency, of course, and audience dedication across live TV and video. And the third one is fraud. That's the topic of today. While connected TV and OTT inventory demand is very strong, the supply of premium impressions are limited. We are hearing that it's creating an opportunity for fraudsters to trick advertisers into buying inventory that does not really exist. And trends show also that more and more CTV inventory is available for direct deals with publishers through programmatic guaranteed or inventory marketplace with curated content versus open marketplace where ad fraud rates are highest. So here comes my first question, and it would be for Jean-Christophe. Which specificities of the CTV OTT segments make it a unique playground quality-wise?
Yep. So this segment presents three main specificities, which makes it unique and quite unusual, actually, from a quality standpoint. So the first one is really diversity. This is really what defines this segment. Diversity in company business roles, which you have talked to, Gérald, broadcasters, TV over IP, digital terrestrial video, OTT device manufacturers, OTT video services providers. There's a lot. But as well, diversity in how viewers are consuming, being dynamic on OTT devices, on gaming devices, and diversity, finally, in what viewers are watching, OTT video services, authenticated apps, or unbundled apps. So diversity is really the first aspect that makes it unique. On the second hand, the notion of owned and operated is more complex to define than in other industry segments. The historically owned and operated refers exclusively to TV and radio stations that are owned by a given company, but airs another network's programming. And in Adtech, and especially in Quality at Smart, we use this concept of owned and operated to distinguish a publisher from an intermediary, and as a result, determine the level of control a seller has over its inventory. While it's very common in web and app segments to see a single company have these two responsibilities, owned and operated, for a given property, we see a number of situations unique to video in which O&O, so owned and operated, is not so easy to define. Last, the industry quality standards are not yet fully applicable in the CTV OTT segment. The lack of IT standardization makes the APAT60 standard irrelevant to date. We know that the IAB Tech Lab is aware of that and actually should issue a set of recommendations there anytime soon, I think later this month actually. But still, it's lacking to date, and even when the standard will be there, it will take months to adopt. Beyond that, getting accurate device information is really vital in quality in general, and especially it's especially difficult when it comes to CTV OTT to get the device type or operating system, for instance. And last, CTV OTT actors still feel that the segment is untouched by any standard, and there's quite some education to be made to make them acknowledge that even they should consider adopting sellers JSON and supply chain object standards, which is a battle we are fighting on an ongoing basis.
So yeah, so CTV, OTT are very specific from what you say, due to multiple roles of stakeholders in the TV industry first. Then the video inventory fragmentation, who owns, who operates, who monetizes, the variety of platform devices used by consumers, and the lack of digital quality standards. Mike, from your point of view, are malicious attempts in the CTV OTT space segments different in nature?
Yeah, good question. Like any sort of segment of traffic that you look at, there's always going to be similarities and differences with the other ones. In this case, OTT and CTV itself is extremely similar to mobile, both in terms of the applications being the primary content delivery mechanism and some of the threats that we're seeing moving over from mobile to CTV. But it's also still similar to desktop as well, from a primarily static nature of expected real devices, residential traffic, and so on. But what you mentioned before, Gérald, one of the largest differences is that fragmented device ecosystem. Within the mobile space, you effectively just have iOS and Android, but in the CTV space, you have stuff like Roku, Tizen, Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, all of these different operating systems and devices, which leads to scalability issues for any sort of fraud detection and also acting fraud operations beyond device impersonation. So if you want to scale out any sort of threat that's beyond device impersonation, you need to be within those different devices. So there's an upper limit both to what you can do when you've actually infected devices, but that same upper limit also leads to issues with the fraud detection side because you need to understand these different devices and everything. And I mentioned that device impersonation is the one that is kind of outside of that. You don't need to be on CTV devices to do that. So that's where a lot of the fraud opportunities actually are with device impersonation. You can spin up a virtual private system or have some other type of infected device and pretend to be all of these various CTV devices without needing the technical expertise to actually infect those devices that you're impersonating itself. And a lot of reasons why people go the device impersonation route is that is the easiest and quickest way to get the higher CPMs or cost per milli for the CTV traffic. If I have just a general desktop computer and I'm spoofing a Roku device or a Tizen device, I've multiplied that CPM by 10x or more without doing any sort of additional effort beyond what I would do in any sort of other fraud operations. When you combine this with SSAI or server-side ad insertion, where the actual technical solution is to have these beefy server infrastructure actually stitch in the advertisements into the video stream to then be delivered to that edge device. That's great from a user perspective and content consumption perspective, but it's also pretty good for fraudsters because they can now sit within the data center, spin out these ad requests and look like an SSAI server. That's a huge issue, both because of what SSAI is itself, is as this even more opaque segment within the Adtech ecosystem and within the CTV ecosystem, where we're now distanced from whatever edge device we actually want to consider. And we lose that additional transparency into what is actually happening on that edge device. And in some cases, kind of have to trust that servers is doing what it's doing in a legitimate case. But there's still, different interesting ways to detect fraud in those cases without needing the verification tag to fire on the client side. And I guess the biggest difference when you compare these different ecosystems is that there's a limited signal available to those anti-fraud vendors. Based on the integrations with the video content and the video players on these various devices. Within the web space, you have potentially rich JavaScript signals. Similarly with mobile apps, you can get other rich signals as well. But CTV space is really, really limited to effectively pixel or one-by-one firing, and not too much else. There are different cases where you can get vast information and other types of enriched signals, but for the most part, it is that one-by-one issues. So what that means is that there's less information for an anti-fraud vendor to look at to determine if there actually is fraud happening. But that also means that there's less information that the fraudsters need to get right when you look at what's actually available to it. So all of that is kind of like a double-edged sword. The ecosystem itself makes it hard for fraudsters to scale up their operations and hard for anti-fraud vendors to identify those things because of those issues. But they're not insurmountable challenges.
Okay, so as you said, CTV shares some similarities with web and mobile, but there are some large differences due to the number of devices that are different and system to manage. And it seems that the largest component of fraudulent activity is device spoofing. Jean-Christophe, from your point of view, which behaviors and action should Adtech players consider to interact safely in the CTV OTT segments?
Sorry, sure. So actually, the very first thing that everyone should do is just keep in mind the equality golden rule, as I call it, which is if it's too good to be true, it probably isn't. I've seen minor channels generate a lot more ad call than they should ever have. I've seen small companies with a handful of employees manage more than 500 OTT apps. And I do not think this practice corresponds to valuable content and good inventory. So really simply keeping our eyes open that's smart has helped us stay away from this. And I can only encourage you to do the same. Now, if you work at an SSP, I think a good thing would be to pay close attention to the company background of the sellers before onboarding them. Obviously, enforcing the implementation of the seller's JSON and supply chain object standards is definitely a plus. And as well, be strict when declaring the seller's role, publisher versus intermediary, in your own seller's JSON file, because this drives transparency as well for others you are interacting with in the industry. And this is really helpful for everyone. Now, if you work at a DSP, I would really consider shifting spends to platforms on which channel IDs and proper inventory and device information is passed into the bid request you receive. Because as soon as the budget starts flowing to the inventory abiding by proper standards, it really encourages a virtuous set of behaviors across the industry, because you have to adopt those good practices to actually get the money. And finally, if you are a buyer, I would really ask your DSPs to provide you with more transparency on the inventory purchase with your money. You can ask, for instance, for the nature of the inventory providers or for the number of intermediaries involved along the supply chain. Those are really valuable information for you to know exactly where your money is going through and whether it's actually landing on proper inventory and high quality inventory.
Yeah, so we can say that one thing that could help with tracking video as fraud is having an SSP that provides full control and monitoring of inventory for sellers and buyers. Mike, what do you think on your side?
Yeah, completely agree with those existing industry standards. One of the biggest hurdles right now is that a lot of these different subsets of the CTV ecosystem don't follow those standards. So the IAB has presented a standardization for how the application IDs are declared, and that isn't always followed within the Adtech ecosystem. Why that's important is that by having a standard approach to how you declare your app IDs, instead of declaring them any number of different ways, creates an easier way to surface app ads.txt cross-references to sellers.json and all of those other industry standards that are in place right now, but just aren't well supported within the ecosystem. And that's an issue both for the publishers of those apps themselves, as well as the channel stores that actually present those apps. So support is needed on both of those ends. There's some interesting future standards that are in the works right now that can help combat the most prevalent case of fraud, which is device impersonation. And the technical case there is device attestation, where you create an actual token that's independently verifiable that the actual impression or event came from the device that it's actually saying. So in that case, you can say, okay, this CTV device is calling itself this smart TV or this particular brand, and someone else can check that after the fact. And that's a really positive feedback loop to eliminate a large source of the current fraud that's in place. And that's would be an open standard that any sort of platform or ad verification vendor could do without relying on those things. But on a whole, there's a ton of need for cross-industry support. If just a single CTV platform adopts some of these standards or improves these standards, then that's still an upper limit to where the increased protection from them comes into play. So a lot of it is the entire ecosystem needs to come together to support and push forward, so it's not just subsets of it get these improved defenses.
Okay. From your perspective, both of you, what progress should we expect over the next 6-12 months on this topic? Mike?
Yeah, going on standards, there's going to be increased adoption because of people pushing within the ecosystem for actually wanting app ads.txt to apply to CTV for these increased standards, for just the baseline coverage that they can provide. So I see a lot of the major platforms within the CTV space adding increased support for these different standards and surfacing this information, as well as improvements to the existing ones, both from IAB and different subcomponents there. The ones that are in the works right now, I can see those actually being used and deployed and getting wider adoption outside of the initial investors into those standards. So that would be around device attestation, seeing that expand beyond the players that are currently working or investing their time and effort into that solution.
Jean-Christophe?
Yeah, I think actually in the end, industry actors, start realizing that taking the right actions is probably going to, again, shift spend towards the better inventory and drive as well better behavior in terms of declaring inventory and making sure that we funnel the right things. And so really, again, SSPs should be careful about which customer they onboard, DSPs about which inventory they spend budget on, and buyers on which targeting criteria they implement, so that we can all collectively minimize the exposure of low quality inventory and increase the exposure of high quality inventory.
Okay, I think now we can take some questions if there are some from the audience.
Yeah, actually, I see one on the chat. So DV, I assume Double Verify is trying to close this fraud issue for 2021 year pipeline. Is this realistic? So,
Yeah.
Do you want to take it, Meg? Oh,
yeah, I can start and feel free to hop in. I'm going to assume that they're referring to device impersonation. And yeah, it's one of those things where there will always be new operations that spin up that commit device impersonation in the future, but we expect that to go down over time because we have these increased levels of coverage, both from anti-fraud vendors like WhiteOps and Double Verify, as well as these open standards. So I would expect by the end of 2021, the percentage of effort and time required to address device impersonation is dramatically lessened or minimized almost to zero. But like everything will never go away. New operations will spin up. There will be interesting subcases of now impersonating a device on the same device that you're running on. So in that case, that would be like a Vizio Smart TV also spoofing other Vizio Smart TVs. And some of that can and cannot be solved by these improved standards, but it definitely would become a much smaller proportion of the current threats we're seeing and invalid traffic as a whole by the end of the year.
Yep, and actually, just adding a few words to your answer, one thing we have to remember is that as soon as you have an industry in which some products are worth 100x times some other products, there will be counterfeited inventory. And here we're talking about OTT CTV, which is the top of the most expensive inventory that exists in the industry. And so the incentive to spoof or to manipulate the traffic is really, really high, which is why right now the share of fraud is relatively high in CTV OTT. And so really what should happen is not necessarily that fraud is a solved problem, but fraud should be a contained problem, like in other environments. As soon as most actors actually behave and again are vigilant about what they buy, they should engage in this segment. This is a really fast growing and like amazing segment in terms of what we can do. But again, being vigilant about what we do here will take frauds to low levels compared to the levels they are right now.
Yep, completely agree. Thank you for adding that.
Is there any other question, Jean-Christophe?
Don't see any. I think this is it for now.
So thank you very much, Mike and Jean-Christophe, and looking forward, thanks to your insight and recommendation to improve the control of the fraud on CTV and OTT. Thank you.
Thank you, Gérald.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, bye.